Welcome to the wild world of Adobe Fresco. It's a free drawing app that's way more powerful than it has any right to be. Shoot, I love it so much I'd legit pay 10 times more than what they're charging to use this app. Wait, 10 times 0 is still 0. Then shoot, I'd legit pay 100 times more than what they're charging to use this app. Cause it's free. Yeah, I think it was about 6 months ago when Adobe pulled a major boss move and said, you know what, screw it. Adobe Fresco is now free for all users. Let's go, baby. Now listen, let's get serious for a second. I know there was a lot of confusion and uncertainty last summer around Adobe and how they train their generative AI. As an artist, I was a little concerned myself, not gonna lie. I'm gonna leave a link down in the description to their full approach, but the important thing to take away is this: Adobe does not use user data to train their AI. They don't use your art, they don't use files that you put into their programs. What they use is Adobe stock images, which they have purchased and paid for. They're under a totally separate agreement. They're not using your stuff. They're not using the art that you make in their apps. After researching it myself, I'm of the opinion that Adobe is actually taking a bit more care than other big AI companies when it comes to artist rights. Had to get that out of the way. Anyway, now that we've addressed the elephant in the room, it just so happens that Adobe Fresco is my daily driver when it comes to making art. That's why I'm so excited to be partnering with Adobe to bring you a little beginner's guide to all things Fresco. For anyone who's seen my channel before, you know that I use Fresco for pretty much every single project that I do. In fact, I talk about it so much for free, I'm really surprised they hit me up for this. Solid move, Adobe. Solid move. I'm obsessed with it, and I think you will be too once I show you some of the cool features that are inside of this app. So, enough chit chat, let's dive into it. Diving animation. Okay, so when we open up Fresco, we see this lovely little screen right here. Behold the home page. If you've worked in Fresco before, you're gonna see some of your recent documents here, and you can pop over to the Files tab if you want a comprehensive list of everything you've done. It's also cool that all these files integrate seamlessly with Photoshop if you happen to use that program. So you can close Fresco, open Photoshop, and poof, your artwork is right there waiting for you. Okay, let's create our document. Let's tap here where it says custom size, and we got some nice templates here under digital, print, and social. Digital has useful stuff like, you know, screen size, HD, 4K, 8K, and so on. I will say all the stuff in here defaults to 72 ppi, which means it's not the best option if you're gonna print your artwork physically, but luckily we have templates labeled print, which is right here. And as you may be able to assume from the name, it's good if you're gonna make physical prints of your art. All these templates default to 300 ppi, which is the resolution you need for making physical prints and merch and stuff that exists in real life. And finally, we have social, which is great if you're gonna make art for Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. They have things like posts, reels, thumbnails, and all that other social media jazz. It's embarrassing how many times I've looked up the default dimensions for a vertical Instagram post, but that finally stops here. All these templates are nice, but just to give you guys the full experience, let's skip the templates and DIY this canvas. I'm gonna change my unit from pixels 2 inches right here and make my canvas 11 inches by 14 inches. For my pixel size, I'm gonna change that from 72 ppi to 300 ppi. I pretty much always set this at 300. I want the flexibility to print my artwork. If I want, I can check this little box right here that says save this size, and that way these document settings are in my save tab right here for next time. Okay, let's create document. Okay, now that my document is set up, let's jump into making something with Fresco. Okay, it's art time. Let's get a quick lay of the land. Over here we have the toolbar. It's got a bunch of brushes, eraser, some selection and transform stuff, paint bucket. We can import photos and files and stuff here. Down here we can select our color, play with brush size, and settings. We're gonna be getting more familiar with all this stuff as we make some art. Up here is the title bar. We can name and save our file. You got undo and redo, and then we have some sharing, exporting, and application settings. This is all good stuff. And over here is the taskbar. A lot of stuff over here has to do with layers and just a bunch of super clutch features we're gonna be needing. I'm gonna do my best to explain almost everything you see here on screen, especially the stuff that makes Fresco so dope. So let's have a look-see at some of these brushes. So you may have noticed that Fresco has 3 different brush tools. Under pixel brushes, you have everything from a basic round brush all the way to this freaking psychedelic wizardry right here. There's a lot of good ones in here. Like, look at this freaking ink roller, dude. That's fire. You got some nice half tones. This lettering brush is saucy. In fact, I kind of like everything in this entire lettering category. The way this marker brush kind of has this like overlapping faded opacity, it's all textury and the vibe is really sick. And the multicolor brushes are absolutely wild. There's a ton of great brushes here. What's also cool is that Fresco brushes and Photoshop brushes are the exact same thing. So if you have a bunch of favorite brushes, you can click add brushes down here, import your own, or tap discover new brushes to download thousands of professional brushes for free. Then right below pixel brushes, we have live brushes. These ones blow my mind. It's like the watercolors stay wet, and as you use them, they blend and bleed, and it's like you're reactivating them with real water. The same thing goes with these oil paint brushes, like crazy blending and textures that acts like real oil paint. And next up, we got the big one, baby. This little guy right here is my top reason I'm obsessed with Fresco. That's right, vector brushes. Let's go, baby. We got vector brushes. For those who aren't in the know, vector graphics are different from pixel graphics, aka raster graphics. Pixel graphics, aka raster graphics, use fixed pixels to make your art. When you make raster graphics larger, those fixed pixels just keep getting larger and your art loses quality and looks more pixelated the larger you go. Vector, on the other hand, uses math and geometry to make graphics, so you can keep scaling vectors up and up and up, and your art stays crispy and clean the whole time. So it's just a dream come true for me to be able to draw with vector lines as I create my artwork right here on my tablet and have the amazing flexibility to know that I can use this artwork for anything I need in the future, from playing cards all the way up to billboards. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at our brush types, let's go back to the pixel brushes, and I'm just gonna grab a pencil brush here so that I can make my sketch. Now, I have some personal preferences when it comes to pencil brushes, so I'm gonna pop down here to my brush settings and make a couple little tweaks. On my pressure dynamics, I'm gonna crank the size slider way up so that when I press lightly, I get very thin and light line, and when I go heavy, it's thicker. And on my stylus pressure, I'm gonna shift that to as light as it will go. When I'm in the sketch mode, I like a very light touch so that I can gently sketch in lines and see how they look, and then go a bit more heavy-handed to commit to those lines on subsequent passes of sketching. One thing to keep in mind is that this stylus pressure, that's so hard to say. Stylish pressure. Stylish pressure. Fresco. Adobe Fresco. One thing to keep in mind about this stylus pressure option is that this one particular brush setting is a global setting for all of Fresco, so that when I'm finished sketching, I like to switch this back to just one more tick heavier when I'm inking. All your other settings are specific to this individual brush, but the stylus pressure setting applies to all brushes. Plus, if you hit this little star right here on any brush you like, it'll be added to your favorites. And I love how I can reorder my favorites, so my go-to brushes are always right at the top waiting for me. Oh, and also right here, we have important settings like brush size, brush flow, and brush smoothing. Okay. So now I'm gonna sketch out my concept. I think for this sketch, I'm gonna do part of it in symmetry mode just to show you how cool these features are. Okay, over here we have all kinds of grids, which is super helpful. You can adjust the opacity of your grid and spacing and all that cool jazz. Grids come in handy for all kinds of art. But if you look right down here, you have symmetry mode. And they legit have so many kinds of symmetrical options. You got your classic mirror symmetry and quadrants. Then you have stuff sliced like 6 ways and 8 ways, and all the way up to whatever this is. This is getting trippy. They even have rotational symmetry. When they dropped this update with symmetry, I was like, oh, it's game over, baby. I was hoping for just simple mirror symmetry and maybe, you know, if I was lucky, maybe some quadrants. And then they gave us all this. Little side tangent, updates. I have never used an art app that releases so many game-changing updates. Other art apps might do a little minor bug fixes or whatever, but I literally can't wait for every single Fresco update because it seems like they are constantly doing absolutely huge updates with major life-altering features added. I look forward to a Fresco update like the first day of summer vacation, I swear. Anyway, a lot of times when I'm sketching, I'll sketch in a color like navy blue blue, and when I reach a point where I'm gonna work on like a new element, right over here in this little circle is where you tap and it'll bring up your color selection panel, and I can choose whatever color I want. I'll switch my color to something like red and create a new layer to work on for my next part, and this just helps me stay visually organized when my sketch gets busy. You can create a new layer with this button over here, and Fresco is great because it doesn't have any layer limits like some other art apps. There's a lot of editing that takes place in my sketching phase, so I'll make lots of layers and keep switching my pencil color to keep things straight. As I lay new elements on top of each other, I may want to mask out some of my previous work. Masking non-destructively hides portions of that layer. It gives me more flexibility than just permanently erasing something. I can tap my layer here, select Create Empty Mask, and now I see these two buttons that say Reveal Layer and Hide Layer. I actually really like how Fresco handles masks. In a lot of other programs, to hide something, you have to use the color black, and to reveal something, you have to use the color white. But with Fresco, you just have these Reveal Layer and Hide Layer options down here. If you want to hide stuff, you can just click on the Hide Layer option, and you can use any old color you want to mask. I find this a bit faster than going over to the color menu, selecting the correct color, and then masking. Just tapping these little buttons is faster and easier in my opinion. Another reason I work in lots of layers when I'm sketching is that I'm doing plenty of transforming while I'm sketching. I can tap over here to access my transform tools. You can move, scale, skew, distort. If you grab the corners, it scales up uniformly, but if you grab the middle dots, it's more of like a free form transform. One little trick, if you want to scale up and down your art, but keep it perfectly centered, you could grab this top corner and then move it, and then go over here to the opposite side and then move that down a little bit, and go back and forth trying to keep your art centered. Or you could double tap your touch modifier down here, which is this little circle thingy, and it will scale up from a center anchor point. This is my preferred way most times, since I'm usually trying to keep things centered. And if you want to move your sketch around, once again, you can double tap the touch modifier and you can lock it into moving along the X or Y position. So you can move it exactly horizontal or exactly vertical without it getting off center. You also have these nice little arrows down here if you want to nudge things by just a pixel at a time. This is great for super fine adjustments. Plus, if you double tap the touch modifier, you can move them by 10 pixels at a time instead of just the 1 pixel at a time. And then you got Liquify. This is also great for editing my sketch because with Liquify, you can do a bunch of stuff like warp, bloat, pucker, twirl. It can be helpful to just push things around and make adjustments in my proportions and fix things that look a little weird in my sketch. If I want to tweak one small portion of my layer, I reach for my selection tools. I'll grab my lasso tool, draw my little selection, or I can lift my stylus and tap points to have it become more of a polygon lasso tool. From there, I can transform my selection or copy and paste this one part to a new layer so I can tweak it some more. So that's the selection tool. And of course, I have my eraser tool here to get rid of stuff I don't want. When I'm sketching, I can keep holding my pencil down for my lines to snap into a straight line, or I can draw an oval or a circle and keep holding down and it will snap to like a perfect shape. Another way to do this, if I want even more accuracy, is their drawing aids. We tap down here and we have stuff like this straight edge ruler. You can bust out this virtual ruler and line it up and use it to trace straight lines. Your brush is going to lock to the edge of this thing and you can really get precise with this. You have a similar concept with a circle, a square, and polygon drawing aids. So you look at this, you can just draw outside this circle to get a perfect shape. Okay, now that I got my sketch all sketchified and my concept all concepty, let's move on to inking the sketch. First, let's put all these sketch layers into a nice little group. If you want to group your layers, you can hold your stylus down on a layer till it pops up a little bit and then move it onto the layer beneath it, release, and they're grouped. But this can be a little finicky and take a little while, especially if you want to do lots of layers. So the way I like to do it is I double tap my touch modifier here, then I click on all the layers I want to group. Then I hit this little folder icon right here and bam, they're all grouped. And if I tap right here, I can name my layers or even name my layer groups, which I really need to get in the habit of doing this more often because when I open this up in Photoshop or Illustrator, I'm always hunting through all my layers and I'm like, which one was this again? And speaking of layers, unlike other art apps, you can adjust the opacity of an entire group all at once, instead of having to adjust the opacity of every single layer inside that group individually. Thank you, Fresco. This just makes so much sense. I can't believe some other art apps, I won't name any names here, don't have this. So yeah, I'm gonna open up my layer properties here and lower the opacity of this whole sketch group so that I can work on my inks. Okay, next I'm gonna grab my vector brush. So on my vector brush, I like to crank my smoothing all the way up to 100%. I'm of the opinion that Fresco has the best brush smoothing in the game. So smooth. You can see in my footage, my line is slightly delayed behind my actual stylus when I'm drawing because my smoothing is cranked all the way up to 100% and the real-time smoothing is being applied as I draw. Surprisingly, this tiny bit of lag doesn't bother me or affect my art at all, and I don't really notice it. You know, when I was using my pencils in the sketch phase, I didn't want any lag at all, but now that I'm just kind of tracing my sketch, that little bit of delay, no problem. But if you want to get rid of that, I find that on my device, it goes away at about 75% line smoothing. Your results may vary depending on the power of your tablet, but for me, 100% baby. The only time I really typically drop this down is when I'm doing like shaggy fur or quick hatching lines where I want to make a bunch of really quick strokes really fast, so I lower my smoothing. And while I'm inking, this is where another one of my absolute favorite Fresco features comes into play, vector trimming. Oh my god, this is the best. Okay, check this out. If I draw lines with my vector brush, I can draw them past the point where I want the two lines to meet, then I'll triple tap my touch modifier down here, and then I can slash through the extra bits of lines I don't want. And now I have perfect corners where the two lines meet. This is the freaking best, right? Oh, and here's an extra feature for the extra feature that I just learned. If you're in your vector trimming mode, instead of slashing through your line, if you do this little S slash through it, it erases the whole path instead of just the extra bit. So I just go swish, 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 and it gets rid of the whole line, not just the extra little bit that goes past the intersection. This can be really useful. Oh, and just like with any other brush, if you double tap the touch modifier, whatever brush you're using will become the eraser. Like the brush size and shape and settings will all be the exact same on the eraser as whatever brush you're using. So if you have a bit of texture on your brush, you'll also have a bit of texture on your eraser. I find myself using this pretty often instead of switching to the actual eraser. As I'm inking my lines, I'm trying to be pretty careful to close all the gaps in my lines. In my next step, I'm going to be using the line work as a guide for my fill colors. And in order for that to work the best, all the little gaps between the lines need to be closed. As a matter of fact, this line art is looking pretty good. So let's move on to those fill colors. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is tap my inks layer right here and tap this option that says set as reference. This will allow me to create a new layer for my fill colors that is separate from my inks layers. Since my inks are my reference, this fill color layer will follow the inks as a guide. When I start filling in on this new layer, it's gonna ask if I wanna fill this as pixel colors or vector colors. I'm gonna go with vector, and now we're off and running as I fill in the colors on my art. This is why it was important for me to try and close as many gaps as possible when I was inking so that my flat colors can follow the closed shapes of my inks layer as I lay down my colors. An extra quick tip for the paint bucket tool, if you double tap the touch modifier, instead of filling a color, it will erase that color. But I will warn you, this doesn't work if you have a reference layer turned on, so I gotta go to my inks first, release the reference, then when I double tap my touch modifier, my paint bucket will erase. I discovered this while filming these clips and I was like, what? Why isn't it working? So there's another pro tip for you. If I want to grab a previous color I've already been using, I can just use my eyedropper tool. Or a little tip, if you just hold down your finger for a couple seconds on the screen, it automatically pops up the eyedropper without you having to select the actual tool. One other thing about the eyedropper tool, if you hit this button right here, it will pull up the multicolor eyedropper, which is crazy. You can actually make multicolor swatches, which can transform your brushes into 3D looking pipes or rainbow color explosions, or make them a repeating stamp of a design you made. This is a crazy feature that you'll spend way too long playing with as you keep making more and more multicolor swatches. So like if I made some multicolor scribbles right here, I can grab my multicolor eyedropper tool and then zoom my canvas out far enough for my swatch to line up inside this little sample window here. There we go, that looks about right. And then I grab my brush and then look at that, I'm drawing with a multicolor swatch. That's just so freaking cool. One thing we haven't talked about yet is this little photo icon right here. You can use this to bring in photos, files, and some other stuff. Let's say I want to bring in a reference photo for my coloring. I'll pull it in from my photos library and it'll make a little palette library over here in my color picker area from this photo. I can also place my photo reference here outside the canvas. And if I'm using vector graphics, I can draw outside my canvas. Maybe I want to scribble some color swatches out here or scale my art past the edge of the canvas a little bit so I can see what it looks like larger. I can totally do that. Other art apps will crop anything that goes outside your canvas, but Fresco lets you place references images and vector graphics outside your canvas without them just being permanently deleted, and I love that. All right, my illustration has some colors, but is not done yet. This next part is where we bring this thing to life. I'm gonna make a new layer in between my flat color layer and my inks layer. There's a couple methods I could use for shadows, like I could just select a shadow color for this part here and start drawing in my shadows, which is something I do all the time. But I think for this one, I'm gonna do kind of a purpley cool shadow layer for the whole piece. Okay, first I'm gonna remember to release my reference on my inks layer since we aren't using the paint bucket tool anymore and we don't wanna have some weirdness caused by this later. Then I'm gonna grab my magic wand tool right here. Then I'm gonna click in the empty area outside my character here. And I also wanna tap this closed off area to add it to my selection and this one and this one. Okay, so now I have this area outside of my character selected, but I want to invert this selection so I can shade the inside of my character. So I'm gonna tap these 3 dots here and choose invert selection. And you know what? All these little dotted lines are kind of distracting me. So I'm gonna go ahead and hide my selection for now. My selection's still going. I just got rid of all these little marching ants so that I can focus on my art. All right, so now I'm gonna grab kind of a dark purpley color here that I'm gonna use for my shadows. And just as an example, I'm gonna lay down this shadow right here. That looks pretty weird, but don't worry because I'm gonna go over to my layer properties and set this from normal to multiply. And then I'm gonna lower my layer opacity from 100% to about 50%. There we go. That's looking better. Now I can just go around this whole piece and add in shadows with my cool purple shadow color. And since my selection won't let me draw outside my character, I don't have to worry too much about going outside the lines. Now I could do the same thing with the clipping mask. Right here we have this clipping mask button. If I have a layer here, I can create a new layer above it and clip it to the layer beneath. That way, any changes I make to this layer will be locked to the layer beneath. It's great for changing colors on stuff and adding some cool textures or doing shading, but when I'm using vector art, I don't use this that much because one thing I've noticed is that when I export my vectors to Illustrator, if I've used this clipping mask feature, it limits me being able to edit my vectors on any layer that's beneath the clipping mask. So the clipping mask is awesome if you're working with pixel graphics, but I generally skip it when I work in vector and use this sort of magic wand method I just showed you instead. All right, got my shadows done. And then for highlights, I just want to grab some highlight colors and paint those in and start bringing in more depth to my illustration. Again, I'm keeping my smoothing cranked all the way up to 100%, so there is that tiny bit of lag that you can see in my footage, but I literally don't notice it at all, and I'm just loving how smooth these vector paint strokes look. And one tool I haven't been able to touch on yet with this art piece is the shapes tool. If you click it, you got some shapes. There's a handful of stock shapes in here. I don't find myself using all that often, but I have been told that there is some exciting updates coming quite soon to this little area right here that may make this section a bit more interesting. I'm excited to see what that's all about. But wait just a second. Before we write this shapes tool off, this little fella has a hidden power. When this tool becomes truly epic is when you add in your own shapes, especially when you combo it with another free app from Adobe called Capture. Capture lets you take photos on your phone, and it has the ability to turn what you capture into vector shapes. You can go crazy snapping all kinds of interesting design elements, sketches, and shapes, and then import them into Fresco to add into your artwork. When you start creating and importing your own shapes, the sky's the limit with this tool. Oh, and let me not forget the text tool right here. You just tap in your document, type something out. Then over here in our layer properties, we have fonts, scale, and all the text tools to get your type just right. Okay, my illustration is looking pretty solid. Now I'm gonna show you how to export your work. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering about Fresco's motion features, I made a whole second video that's a companion to this video over on the Adobe Creative Cloud YouTube channel, where I go through all the animation you can do with Fresco's motion features. There's a link to that in the description, but let me show you how to export your work. This is the export button up here. You have quick export, which just saves it as a 72 ppi JPEG file. You have open a copy, which lets you open this up in Adobe Illustrator on iPad or desktop. If you worked with vector brushes a lot in your artwork, this is a great way to continue your vector journey over there. Speaking of opening it up in other programs, if I open up Photoshop on my computer here, boom, my Fresco file is sitting right here in Photoshop just by me saving it. No need to export. And if I keep working on it in Photoshop, all my edits will automatically sync back to Fresco. Anyway, back in Fresco, you have Share a Link, which lets you collaborate with others on your Fresco files. You got Preview Time Lapse, which lets you export a time lapse of you making your entire art piece. And then at the top here, I skipped over the main one that says Publish and Export, because this page gives you the most options on exporting. You can select Export As and select PNG, JPEG, PSD, which is Photoshop document, and PDF. Pro tip, if you export as PDF, that file type also keeps all your vectors being all vectory, and you can open that PDF up inside of Adobe Illustrator to keep tweaking your vectors. This is actually the one I use most often. In this export screen, you can also export your animations with this motion tab, and it lets you export as an MP4 video file, a GIF, or each frame individually as a PNG sequence. And then we have this new content credentials feature, which bakes in some durable metadata that's kind of like a digital nutrition label. You can tag that it was created without using generative AI. And for me, this option is actually grayed out. I didn't use any generative AI on this, but if you review the guidelines right here, your artwork has to not include any imported images, which I brought in that reference photo to show you guys that example of how you can bring in photos. But after I showed the team at Adobe this part of my video, they told me I could just remove that photo that I imported and I would become eligible to be tagged as not made with generative AI. Also, this feature isn't in Photoshop yet, but leave a comment if you want this feature to be implemented into Photoshop. You can also connect your social media accounts and bake that into the metadata as well. So that's kind of cool. You can put your digital fingerprint on your artwork. Adobe Fresco is a one-stop shop for all the tools I need to make my art and even make some animations too. Everything in here just kind of makes sense to me, and it's removed a lot of the frustrations that us artists have had to learn to deal with when it comes to other art apps. It always takes a bit of motivation to dive into a new app, learn a new app, but I was shocked at how quick I learned Fresco when I picked it up a few years back, and hopefully this video helps you dive in too. Plus, Fresco is now free. That's like the coolest reverse inflation ever. There's no catch. It's not free with a subscription. It's just plain old free. If you want to give Fresco a whirl, check out the link in my description to download it for, as I said, free. And if you found this video helpful or learned anything, hit that like button, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also, as I mentioned before, I made a part 2 to this video where I take this illustration and using Adobe Fresco's motion features, I animated this entire illustration, added movement, brought it to life. So you can check out that step-by-step process video over on the Adobe Creative Cloud YouTube channel. There's a link to that video down in the description. Part 2 of this video right here. Check it out if you've got a yearning for learning. I'm 1000. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace out.